I am Dr. Kolff, K-O-L-F-F. We are at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, Utah. This is October 27, 1995.
Yes, my name is David Ahlstrom, and I'm from New York University, and I'm here to ask Dr. Kolff some of his recollections concerning not only the artificial kidney, but also some of his current work today with the artificial heart. So we have several questions, and I'll proceed by asking Dr. Kolff these questions, and I'm doing this partly on behalf of Dr. Cameron from the UK, who's doing some work also on the history of nephrology, particularly concerning the International Society of Nephrology. So just to start...
Okay, will you play back, please? Play it back. I want to hear it.
You can't hear it.
Cannot?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
Okay, well, they can edit and cut anyway. But, all right, well, why don't we start? Dr. Kolff, could you kind of recount for me some of the, perhaps the key events, the things that shaped your thinking and your work on the artificial kidney, perhaps starting from World War II or that era and working forward? Some of the early events and things that defined your work and your career?
When I finished medical school at the University of Leiden, I went to Groningen. Groningen is in the north of Holland. And I went there because it was the only place where you could be an assistant in internal medicine and also be married. And my wife and I had been engaged for 5 years, and I thought that was long enough. So we did get married. I didn't get any salary. I was the youngest volunteer assistant. My responsibility was for 4 beds. And in one of these beds was a young man who slowly and miserably died of renal failure. And I thought, if I could just remove as much urea and other retention products as this man produces, then he could live. Well, it was my good fortune that at the University of Groningen was also Professor Brinkman. And Brinkman participated in all the conferences of the Department of Medicine. He was what we now would call a biochemical engineer, and a wonderful man. And he knew about cellophane. Cellophane was mainly, it came in sheets. It's actually regenerated cellulose. And it also came in tubes. And that was artificial sausage skin. And so from Brinkman I learned the principle of dialysis. And I decided that if I could remove from this patient just as much urea as he formed every day, that he could live. Well, the patient died before I had a useful machine. But I took a piece of cellophane tubing, artificial sausage skin, and put it in a water bath and put 400 milligrams percent of urea in the blood inside that cellophane tubing and shook it up and down. And to my surprise saw that in 1 minute's time most of the urea had been removed. Actually, you could not determine the remaining urea in the urine anymore. So for the first time then I saw how quick dialysis could work, and established the basic principle that you should have a small volume of blood, that both blood and dialyzing fluid should be in motion, and have a large volume of dialyzing fluid. So that was the beginning of making artificial kidneys. And I made several types of artificial kidneys at the University of Groningen. Then the Germans, during the war came, and the Germans put a National Socialist at the head of the department, and I decided that I did not want to work under a National National Socialist. So I left the evening before he came out. And all my papers were in order, because if I had simply left, that would have been sabotage and I would have been sent to a concentration camp. Since I had all my papers in order, I went to my parents' house and looked for a place where I could continue to work as an internist. It was my good fortune that I was appointed in the city of Kampen. Kampen, K-A-M-P-E-N. Kampen is where the river IJssel, which is a branch from the Rhine, so the Rhine comes from Germany, gets off the IJssel. The IJssel goes to the old Zuiderzee, and where the river comes into the old Zuiderzee, there is the old city of Kampen. And when I was there were 23,000 inhabitants, and there was a small hospital, there was one surgeon, and I was the first internist, specialist in internal diseases. And I then decided, since I now made approximately 10,000 guilders per year, divide by 2.5 to have the amount of dollars. Since I now made 10,000 guilders per year, financial consideration should not be in my way. And I immediately went to the local manufacturer of enamel, and that was Mr. Berk, B-E-R-K. And Mr. Berk was one of the directors. I explained the principle of the rotating drum artificial kidney to him, and the first rotating drum artificial kidney was made in the Kampen enamel factory. When it came time to charge me for it, they couldn't, because a factory could only work for the German Wehrmacht, the German army, and so I never got a bill. So it's been a very profitable arrangement for myself, and that was a rotating drum artificial kidney with which the first patients were treated.
And about what year was that? Was it 1943?
The first patient was treated in 1943. It's often forgotten, but that was a patient in chronic renal failure. And remember, I wanted to remove just as much urea as this patient formed, and then I thought she could live. She was treated 12 times, and the last time I had to give up because there was no good vascular access anymore. And then she died. When it came time for her father to pay the bill, he came up to my office, and for the 12 dialysis and the total bill, I charged him 5 guilders per dialysis. I felt he would feel much better if he could pay something. He immediately thanked me, went down to the office and paid. So that was 60 guilders, divided by 2.5, and you have the amount of dollars for the first patient. Dialysis does not have to be very expensive. It's most unfortunate that it is. You could set up the rotating drum artificial kidney, and all you needed was tap water, cellophane tubing, which is artificial sausage skin, which cost almost nothing, some sterilizing fluid, and go ahead. It does not need to be expensive. In the beginning in Kampen, in the small hospital, I had my work during the daytime, but I had the help from Bob van Noordwijk. Noordwijk is spelled N-O-O-R-D-W-I-K. Actually, it's a Dutch I-J. Bob van Noordwijk was a medical student living what we called underground. That means hidden from the Germans. He would be arrested as soon as they saw him. And he set up the artificial kidney during the daytime, and the two of us would dialyze during the night. Bob van Noordwijk later went to London, Ontario, and introduced the artificial kidney in Canada. He became professor of pharmacology and head of the public health system, and he's still a very good friend.
Dr. Kolff, why did you have to dialyze at night? Was it something the Germans didn't want happening?
I was too damn busy.
Oh.
I had to make a living.
It had nothing to do with the Germans.
No, that had nothing to do with the Germans.
Yeah.
Actually, when I had to work with the German doctors because they referred German soldiers to our hospital. And I had to be on the good side of these German soldiers also to protect myself against the very mean burgomaster who was a Dutch National Socialist. But that's another story. I would show the German doctors the artificial kidney, and I recall one of them who said, "Oh, that is the machine that I recognize from having read it in the medical literature." Well, that was impossible because it had not been published yet.
After the war, then you came to the United States. Who was instrumental? Was someone instrumental in bringing you to the U.S. In 1946?
Professor Isidor Snapper, who at that time, Isidor Snapper, just like the fish, was professor of medicine at Mount Sinai Hospital. I had never met him in the Netherlands because he was already in China at the time that I graduated, but of course I knew his name, being a very famous professor of internal medicine, a brilliant man. And I offered him an artificial kidney, which I had made by that time. As a matter of fact, I had made 4 artificial kidneys to be ready after the war. And I offered him one of these artificial kidneys if he would pay for my stay in New York. I believe I paid my own traveling expenses, but I wanted to come to New York to teach them how to use the rotating drum artificial kidney if he paid for my stay in New York. So when I came there, the kidney was waiting. That was one of the artificial kidneys with wooden leads. We didn't have any aluminum anymore, so the rotating drum was made of wooden leads. Okay.
And after you stayed in New York for a while, where did you head after that? Did you return to Holland?
Yeah, well, Snapper then had me give a lecture, and he wanted me to write it down, which I never did. So he forced me to write it down and gave it to an editor, but I still gave it without using the manuscript. He was sitting next to me. It was the first time I used the microphone, and I remember he said, "Speak in your microphone." So I did so. And that apparently came off rather well, because Snapper then organized a trip for me through the United States with my wife, and we went all around, and the last stop was in Boston. And in Boston, I was the guest of Dr. Thor, Thor, at the Peter Van Brigham. And John P. Merrill was a very young physician on that service. By that time I had given my artificial kidneys away, but I gave the plans for the rotating drum artificial kidney to Karl Walter. Karl Walter was a surgeon at the Peter Van Brigham Hospital, and he built a stainless steel version of the rotating drum kidney, and they called it the Brigham artificial kidney. Collaboration with John P. Merrill has always been wonderful. Later on, when he had a transplantation program, kidney transplantation program going on. Dr. Jean Putas and I at the Cleveland Clinic decided that we were going to do kidney transplantation. Putas was an excellent surgeon. He could repair renal arteries. In case of renal hypertension, he would operate on the renal artery. So I was sure that as a, what do you call it, a urologist, he would be able to do the vascular anastomosis. Since I'm on that subject, the Cleveland Clinic was mortally opposed to doing kidney transplantation. I had a young resident go around to poll the various authorities, and they all said we can wait, and when it is later proven that it works, we can get on the bandwagon. Putas and I had a different vision, and we decided to do 6 kidney transplantations in a very rapid order, one after another.
Do you recall approximately what year?
To do it so fast that he would be going on before they could stop us. And all these, at that time, we thought that the remaining kidney, the sick kidneys, might influence the transplanted kidneys. So all these patients were bilaterally nephrectomized, maintained with dialysis, and then in a rapid succession were given donor kidneys. That first series was from living family members. And at the last meeting of the staff, on Saturday morning we had staff meetings. They were excellent. And the whole staff of the Cleveland Clinic came together. And I spoke to the chairman of the meeting and said, give me that last meeting before the vacation. And we had on the podium 6 patients, all bilaterally nephrectomized, all with working kidney transplants, and all in radiant health. Now this was rapidly enough after the transplantation that no rejection was present yet. Well, those that had been against it had no other choice than congratulate us. Of course, they tried to get back us out with a vengeance, but they couldn't stop it after that. This approach is not quite original, because you may recall that Bailey, who introduced the commissurotomy, organized 3 patients in Philadelphia in 3 different hospitals. And when he did the 3rd patient, somebody came in and said, Dr. Bailey, you cannot do that. He said, it's too late, I already done it. That was the only patient that survived commissurotomy, and that established commissurotomy as a treatment of mitral disease. So our approach, Putas and myself, wasn't quite original. We just followed the technique of Bailey, and it worked. Well, about 6 weeks later, the first patient, young lady, began to reject. And it's very significant that we did a renal biopsy, that the report on the renal biopsy, which showed rejection, was circulated through the staff, and they all knew it before we knew it. Now, had we had only 1 patient, they would have stopped us right there. But since this 1 patient who died after 8 months was offset by the 4 other patients who continued to do well, we won.
Do you recall about what year was that? When did that happen? What year was that? You did the 6 transplants.
This was probably in 1955.
Okay, so it was a couple of years now.
Wait a minute. Yeah. No. Take it back. I started back to work on the artificial kidney in Cleveland in 1955. Must have been a little later. Any time between 1955 and 1960. We immediately published it, so you can find it.
encourage you to switch then back, return back to the artificial kidney? Why didn't you continue to pursue transplantation?
I did never leave the artificial kidney. I continued with the artificial kidney. My aim is not so much to make apparatus. I make apparatus when they can improve human happiness. It was quite obvious that a patient with a successful transplant can have a better life than a patient with an artificial kidney. So there is no contradiction in my overall view of what doctors should do. And while you ask it, I have a very simple philosophy ever since I started. And that question is, you ask, is there a reasonable chance that this patient is going to be improved and can have a happy existence with whatever I'm going to do? If there is a reasonable chance, you should do it. If there is no reasonable chance, you should not do it, and you should certainly not prolong life if it means prolonging misery. I recall that in my experience I have refused to further dialyze 2 patients. One was very interesting. He was a man about 20 years old who had rather recently married a very beautiful woman of which he was extremely fond. He developed renal failure, was treated with dialysis, rotating drum artificial kidney. We attempted 4 times a kidney transplant, and he rejected all of them. And at certain moments he began to bite the nurses. And he became very mean. I decided that we had tried enough, that we would not succeed. So came Tuesday, he was not brought down to the dialysis room. He never asked a question. He never asked to be taken down. He became the nicest man you can imagine. He became friendly, nice to the nurses, behaved very well, and all of them came to me and said, Dr. Kolff, we should dialyze him again. And I said no. It took much longer than I had thought. It took 14 days and he died quietly, and I would say happily. He didn't vomit much, he was not very miserable. He just slept, you can say. And then his beautiful wife came to see me. And I then learned that he had bought a Thunderbird automobile, beautiful automobile for her, on a life insurance clause, so that when he died, she would have the last present. So I thought I made a wise decision. Wise decision. Okay, other questions?
Yeah. Well, now that we're kind of in the 1950s in that period, could you comment briefly perhaps on the work of Homer Smith and perhaps some other important individuals of that day who might have influenced you and influenced the direction of your work?
The Snapper, Isidore Snapper from Mount Sinai, organized my trip through the United States, and he also introduced me to everybody he thought to be of importance, and I met with them. So I also met with Homer Smith. He was extremely gracious, and I've only heard by the grapevine that he was not in favor of dialysis, but if he wasn't, he never mentioned it to me. Another man that I met early then was Gene Oliver, I think his name was. He would dissect kidneys and spread out the whole nephron, glomerulus and all the tubulus on a glass plate. And I loved that, and he showed it to me in great detail. And when I came back in the Netherlands, riding in my car, in front of me there was a horse-drawn buggy, and I saw the horse wobble, and I know enough then to know that this horse had mylohemoglobinuria. If you have a heavy-built horse, well-fed, and it's suddenly put to work, his muscles begin to break down myohemoglobin. That shuts off the kidneys, and I knew the symptoms, and I saw the horse, and sure enough, I sent one of these myohemoglobinuric kidneys of a horse to Gene Oliver, and I hope that he spread it out on one of his plates, but I've never heard the result.
Where was he at the time? What university was he at?
He was in New York somewhere.
He was in New York.
I don't forgot where. I also met Necheless, Nechelles. I think they call him Nicholas here. He was a Jewish doctor who fled from Hungary early enough, and he landed in New York and at Mount Sinai Hospital, and he was immensely pleased when I mentioned his name, not knowing that he was there, as another way to treat renal failure. That was peritoneal dialysis. He was the first that did it right, but could not perform anyway. He invited us to his house. He was quite prosperous. I remember he had a Chinese servant who served an excellent dinner.
Did he continue to work on peritoneal dialysis?
Yes.
Is that,
Yes, he continued to work with, not with outstanding success.
Yeah, it took quite a while, I guess.
The people that had done the most outstanding work at that time with peritoneal were in Boston. I met them there. Frank, Seligman, and There were three of them. And in all the publications they changed their name. Yes, Frank, Seligman, and so-and-so, so-and-so, Frank and Seligman, and so on. And I met them there. They did peritoneal dialysis. In the little booklet that I published, New Ways of Treating Uremia, the last chapter there is, or the one book last chapter, there is a picture of the peritoneal dialysis tank that we developed in the Netherlands. All you need for peritoneal dialysis is a large volume of salt fluid that you let in and out of the peritoneal cavity. And you could heat this tank on the kitchen stove. One compartment had everything in it, and the other compartment had the glucose in it. So that with some hydrochloric acid. If you did it that way, you could keep the calcium in solution, and you did not caramelize the glucose. So it cost almost nothing to do peritoneal dialysis that way. And we, in our hospital, we decided for each patient, what will we do, peritoneal dialysis or hemodialysis? Kolff, PSM, Kolff, K-O-P, wrote the first good book about peritoneal dialysis. It's been greatly ignored. And then another book about peritoneal dialysis was written by a Dutchman called Boon, actually Chinese origin, B-O-E-N, in Amsterdam. There is nothing new in the book of Boon that was not in the book by P.S.M. Kolff, K-O, I think it's P.P. Anyway.
A number of people have characterized the 1960s as being a very crucial time in the development of the dialysis machine. What are your recollections from the 60s, particularly in terms of not just the work of Scribner, but also the development, the work toward the ESRD program in the United States?
The what?
The end-stage renal disease program, the amendment to Social Security that eventually paid for dialysis.
Yeah.
What are your recollections from the 60s?
Well, I think it was very important that in 1955, I went to the chairman of the Department of Research, that was Dr. Irvin Page, great scientist, Irvin Page, but not particularly interested in artificial kidneys. And I said, Dr. Page, will you give me 3 weeks, because I think I can make a disposable artificial kidney. And he gave me 3 weeks, and in that time, with the help of Watchinger, who came from Austria to work with us, we made the twin coil artificial kidney. And the twin coil artificial kidney made dialysis possible worldwide. The twin coil artificial kidney consists of window screening, the screening that you use to keep the flies out of your house, wound around a fruit juice can, and in between the windings is the artificial sausage can, the cellophane tube. When I bought the various parts of it in the hardware store, the total cost was $16.25, and Baxter Laboratories, to which we gave the twin coil artificial kidney, sold them for $62. But they did succeed in making dialysis possible worldwide. And it paid from it from the beginning. And they built their entire artificial organ division on that twin coil artificial kidney.
At Baxter. That was
Baxter.
Baxter.
Baxter Laboratories. The division that did it was Travenol.
Travenol, of course.
I had first offered it to Abbott, and it took 6 months, and then I said, if you don't give me a reply now, I'll go to somebody else. So they invited me to come over to Abbott, and at that time Abbott had a board of directors. I don't know what you call them, but he had a governing board, not a president or so, but a governing board who made all the decisions. They were, I remember, a beautiful boardroom, and I gave my presentation, and they all applauded. They were very polite. And the guy who had invited me to come over to give that presentation didn't dare to tell me the results until 11 o'clock. He took me to every nightclub he could find in Chicago, trying in vain to get me drunk, and then said that the board of directors had decided that they've never made an apparatus and they were not going to do it now. They reversed themselves 11 months later and invited me to come over, and I said I saw no use doing that. So it's not always been easy to. So then I called somebody at Baxter. Now, what was his name? Can't think of his name right now. And he immediately accepted. And then they gave it to an engineer in their developing, in their department where they were going to make it. And to my dismay, they came to Salt Lake, came to Cleveland, and they brought various new dialyzers made by Mr. Gehwicke. Gehwicke was a nice man. I think he's still alive. He had a wooden leg, which bothered him when he had to go down slope on a slant. But he was a good engineer, and he, of course, had made numerous variations on the twin coil kidney, all of which he thought would be better than what we had. So we spent a whole long day testing his artificial kidneys and proving that what we had was better. And then my technician overheard Gehwicke and the chief, whose name I now forgot, standing near the sink, and the chief said, why don't we do it Kolff's way? And that was the way they then finally reproduced the twin coil artificial kidney. But they were still somewhat stubborn. At that time, Baxter didn't have any injection molding equipment. And the president was opposed to buying injection molding equipment. So I called my friends at Abbott, who had made by injection molding the attachments where you attached the cellophane tube to the thing. They were made so that they couldn't twist. And Abbott then made a few hundred of these tips, which I gave to Baxter, and those kidneys worked well. But then, being non-believers, they put the regular nylon connectors that you use for intravenous tubing, and of course they twisted, and then twisted the cellophane, and then the blood wouldn't go through. That was one of the early experiences. But Baxter did do the marketing well.
So that machine eventually was the one that diffused around the country.
Yeah.
And is it the one basically that Scribner first used also in Seattle? No, he had
No,
a different
Scribner used an artificial kidney made by Dr. Keel, which was a flat plate kidney. Scribner used flat sheets of cellophane, were more permeable, were thinner than the thinnest artificial source, thinnest wall artificial sausage skin that I could buy. And that was probably an explanation why Scribner's long-term results of dialysis were better using the permeable membrane, higher permeable membrane, than those with the relatively thick artificial sausage skin membrane which I used. So I once sent a patient that did not do well on my chronic dialysis program, I sent him to Scribner in the hope that he'd do better, and I think indeed he did do a little better. But Scribner's machine was too cumbersome to set up for worldwide use. And as you know now, both the keel and the twin coil kidneys have been replaced by capillary dialyzers, which have any kind of capillary membrane in it now that you wish. There are a number of patients that are sensitive to cellophane or regenerated cellulose, and they should have other types of membranes. It's one of my great frustrations that since most dialysis centers are for profit, they object against the use of more expensive membranes, which would actually be much better for their patients.
Yeah, I've heard that from someone at NIH who told me that that research into new membranes has really slowed down because the dialysis centers don't want to buy, they don't want to take on a chance of buying.
Most of the dialysis centers are for profit. Moreover, the dialysis centers connected with large hospitals and universities are a great source of income for nephrologists. And they are the greatest source of income for the nephrologist in most departments. So they also look very carefully at what they will use and will not use. Apart from that, if you have a routine operation and the physician is not particularly interested in dialysis and is left over to the dialysis technician, who is of course sensitive to the hospitality suites that you see at all the meetings, there is no incentive for this man to bother with using a more expensive or more difficult or more cumbersome artificial kidney membrane. Another thing that it's been well proven by a young lady who was a kidney patient herself in Torino, Italy. that if you use the same artificial kidney several times in the same patients, the reactions during second and third dialysis are less than during first dialysis. But that's also a little more cumbersome. It saves money though, but not very much, because the cleaning and sterilizing of that. At the time that before the Public Health Service financed practically all renal disease, by the way, only patients that are covered by Social Security, but that's the majority of them. Before that time, when we had virtually no money to dialyze patients, Nakamoto, who was my long-term co-worker, and I reused the same kidney, restored it with a little extra heparin in it. So he had the twin coil artificial kidney, which at that time needed 2 pints of blood to fill, and added a little extra heparin, stored it in a refrigerator, and the following, after 3 days, used it again and again and again. And when we did that, I recall one patient, we reused it 40 times. We saw something we'd never seen before. Patients began to bleed from their gums. Why, I still don't know. One thing that's very interesting is that the rotating drum artificial kidney, I now go back to Kolff in the Netherlands, is extremely effective. If you have blood urea coming in on one side, blood urea of 400 milligrams %, you say here blood urea nitrogen, that would be 200 milligrams %, and your dialyzing fluid of 100 liter was clean. The blood urea of the blood coming out of that kidney was practically gone. With the old Ambar method which we used, it was hard to find it. It was that little. So it was an extremely effective artificial kidney. And since gravity moved the dialyzing the blood from one end of the cellophane to the other side, there was no pressure gradient, so there was no ultrafiltration. So I had to add extra glucose to the dialyzing fluid. So the extra water was removed, the water was removed by the glucose gradient. Well, Professor Borst in Amsterdam immediately said, well, the glucose will also go inside, so it probably won't work. So I built a machine to prove that it did work. But you could remove water so well that I remember a patient that I dialyzed one night in Amsterdam, and her hands were lying on the sheets, and you could see the edema getting removed from her hands so that the skin would shrivel up. There's no doubt about it. Now there was one thing that saved us, and we didn't know it. When you remove urea with such ferocity or velocity, you would probably get a disequilibrium syndrome. But since I added glucose, that compensated for the disequilibrium syndrome. So we didn't see it. I recall blood sugars of 700 milligrams %. Blood sugars. Yeah. We gave them insulin to take care of the extra glucose.
Dr. Kolff, did you have the opportunity to work at all with Dr. George Schreiner from Georgetown and participate in the 1960s period where they were attempting to gain funding for dialysis patients?
I wasn't really involved in that. I know Schreiner very well. I have great love and admiration for him. He's a wonderful physician. He's done an awful lot. He's also trained a lot of physicians. If I recall well, he himself was also in Korea.
Yes.
As you know from NASH, the rotating drum kidney was used in Korea.
That's right.
There is a basic of truth in MASH. except that it was a rotating drum artificial kidney that was made in the United States and not in Korea. But they used water from the rice field that they sterilized in the drum, and they used dialysis. And since a lot of physicians rotated through that, it brought dialysis into the experience of a lot of young physicians. An outstanding man who was there was Taschon, Paul Taschon, who went to Vanderbilt. He later developed a method so that you could use the cannulas in the arm several times, which was different from the shunt that was introduced by Scribner. Now, the important thing was that Scribner, at a meeting for the Society of Artificial Organs, took his shunt and to the meeting and demonstrated to all of us how you could make it. So I immediately got the material, and within a week after the meeting we had patients with Scribner's shunt on dialysis, and that opened the possibility for repeated dialysis without running out of vascular entry sites. And the first patient that we treated had, of course I always simplify things, so I didn't like this, the Scribner, Quentin Scribner arrangement, which was very complicated and on the arm. We made a simple loop, and which cost almost nothing. And we sent that patient home. The first patient had that shunt for I think 8 months without any problems. Died in a taxi cab from either heart failure or stroke, one of the two.
Do you recall the reaction to Scribner's shunt at the time, at the meeting? Was it generally positive, or were people very skeptical of its use?
Everything that is new is always received with disbelief. So this is probably no exception, but I immediately adopted it, so that was a great contribution, and it was.
Dr. Kolff, what do you think the contribution of the end-stage renal disease program has been to dialysis? Obviously it pays for dialysis for most people. Do you think there have been some negative things associated with it also?
Okay, without the introduction of the dialysis legislation, by the way, this was the first instance where a disease was recognized as a financially catastrophic disease. And consequently, all the costs of that disease were adopted by Social Security. And the great flaw in it has been that there was absolutely no control. It was assumed, probably nobody thought about it, but it was assumed that all physicians were honest. And there was an enormous difference, for example, between the remuneration for a physician of a patient who is in a dialysis center, where, if I recall well, you can look up the figures because I've published them. I think the remuneration for a physician for a patient on center dialysis is $14. The remuneration for a physician for a patient in hospital dialysis is $150 or $300. I forgot, one of the two. But the difference is just too great. The difference in remuneration for the hospital for a patient is, let's say, $300, and for the dialysis is a fraction of that in a dialysis center. So everywhere in the country you saw that patients were maintained on hospital dialysis who had no good reason being there except for the financial rip-off of the government. And this is basically because at that time the American Medical Association and every medical organization in the United States I know of has been basically opposed to every control of what a physician does. Now let me tell you the difference. I worked in the small hospital in Kampen in the Netherlands, and twice a week the two controlling physicians of the what is the funds that provides money for, of the insurance companies that provided the money for the patients, came and sat opposite me on my desk, and he would say, "Kolff, what about Mr. Johnson? You've had him for 4 days now. Do you really need him to stay any longer?" And I would say to the controlling physician, "Well, yes, give me 1 more day. I want to do stomach x-rays. I've been too busy to do it. I promise you I will do it tomorrow," and then he can go home. In other words, I went with the physicians and had to justify every day a patient was in the hospital. And when we did not agree, and sometimes we did, but very rarely, when we did not agree, I could go to a higher instance and I could have a panel of professors of medicine go over the dispute. And the controlling physicians didn't want that, so we always came to a more or less satisfactory solution. But if you don't have any controlling instance that looks at how the government's money is spent, it's wasted. We could send, at one time we made a washing machine artificial kidney. So we built a little roll-up device where the patient could wind its own artificial kidneys. We could send a patient home with a Maytag washing machine and a little rolling machine so that he could roll his own kidneys, and enough cellophane, which cost almost nothing, and enough salts for a month. And all of this, if I recall well, would cost $265 and would be all the supplies he would need for 3 months of home dialysis. Then we would train a member of the family, and there they were. $265 for 3 months of dialysis.
Including everything, the materials?
And that's including everything. Well, at this time, if there are no complications, then the patient is dialyzed in a dialysis center. The cost is probably $15,000, but in more cases it is $25,000 per patient per year. And it's an absolutely ridiculous situation.
Why do you think it's gotten so expensive?
What?
Why do you think the price has escalated so much, or lack of cost control?
Well, I know this is going to be reviewed by nephrologists, because if nephrologists get high salaries, everybody gets high salaries, the companies make money, it's easy to have a whole row of patients lying there, and a doctor sticks his head around the door once a day, and that's what he gets paid for, and it's routine. And if you send patients home and they have a problem at night, they call you. It's a real pain, and you know what? And they paid you, they call you. So, and there are all kinds of negative incentives for home dialysis. So instead of increasing, it is decreasing. I must be honest about it. Also, the dialysis population is getting older. And so when the mothers of the patients or the wives of the patients are getting older, it's more difficult for them to treat them at home. So let's be fair about it too. There are other reasons, but I do want to state that dialysis does not have to be as expensive as it is, and it will remain expensive unless you have a control system that really looks at every patient and sees if it's necessary. Okay, in a town not far from here, Ogden to be exact, we noticed that in a short time 11 patients on the dialysis program died. 11 patients. Whereas actually they very rarely die and only after means. When finally the government organization that should review this bore down on them, since we were the only organization that had a permit to dialyze patients outside the confines of the hospital, because we had the, what was it? Dialysis in Wonderland program. In the Dialysis in Wonderland program, we sent patients out on rafts on the Colorado River, and they had a wearable artificial kidney and dialyzed themselves on the shores of the Colorado River. Not while they're going down the rapids, but on the shores of the Colorado River. And we sent them on houseboats in Lake Powell. And they had a wonderful time, and it has been the most powerful rehabilitation program we've ever had. I recall a little girl about 12 years old, who was willing to stick out her arm so that her mother could dialyze her at home. But otherwise she was totally passive. She went to Lake Powell, was induced to swim, which they can with the breccia shunt, was induced to swim. It changed her whole life. She got an interest in life again, and it's been wonderful. I remember one trip on the Salmon River, where two gentlemen fell overboard. These were elderly gentlemen, but they were fished out, and now they come back to their community and they have something to tell. They're looked at with great admiration by everybody, that notwithstanding being on dialysis, they can be fished out of a river. So we had this Dialysis in Wonderland program, and therefore we were the only organization that could dialyze. And so we were sent to Ogden to dialyze to something like 40 to 60 patients they had on dialysis. It was a beautiful, beautiful building in which they were being dialyzed. So I went to see the head of, we dialyzed with our team, and the Ogden dialysis program is now owned by the patients. A very interesting situation. So I went to see the head of medicine or whatever it was in the hospital, where this physician connected with this unit. And I basically said that he was a crook. I was immediately contradicted in polite terms, and he said he was a very good physician. He was protected by everybody. He was not removed. He was not punished. My associates, Bob Stevens, agreed to review this charts of all those patients on the condition that the names of everybody would be removed, so that he would not know where they came from and what they were. Well, it was quite obvious that they dialyzed patients who did not need it, and they did not dialyze patients enough, because they could have three shifts of dialysis if they dialyzed for only 2 hours. So you can do short-time dialysis. I'm against it. But you can do short-time dialysis if you have a very powerful blood flow, 500 milliliters per minute, and if you have a very good dialyzing membrane. And then maybe you can get away with 3 or 4 hours dialysis. There they dialyze 2 or 3 hours per patient, so they under-dialyzed all their patients to be able to do 3 dialysis per day, 3 shifts per day. So this is my personal experience, and I'm sure it happens all over the United States, and I haven't heard any protest against it. Well, let me finish the story about the washing machine artificial kidney. One day, the lawyer of the Maytag washing machine stepped into my office, and I knew I was in trouble as soon as I saw that lawyer. And he pointed out that if one of my patients died on his washing machine, the nuisance value of the lawsuit would be of the order of magnitude of $22,000. Now, this is many years ago. It would be now $60,000. And he said the Maytag company was not in this kind of business, and from that moment on, I had to buy the washing machines on the black market because the dealers were not willing to sell them to me. They had to do that at their own risk. And I didn't like that. So when I came to Salt Lake City, I induced Steve Jacobson, who is a very excellent biomedical engineer, who developed the artificial arms and robots and many other things, but he was very young then. And as Steve Jacobson went to the Job Corps, and he got the nose cone of a rocket, which was a wonderful tank. And instead of the Maytag washing machine, we used the nose cone artificial kidney. I think we sent about 28 patients or so home with the nose cone artificial kidney. But it was too inexpensive.
Too inexpensive?
Too inexpensive. No commercial company can make a profit on something that is too inexpensive. That's a very sad thing. It becomes an orphan. That's the term for it. We have another device. It's called the SPAD. The SPAD was a device that you put under the skin, and there goes a little button through the peritoneal cavity, and it's under the skin. You can go swimming, and for each peritoneal dialysis, you put a needle in that SPAD. But the total price for which you can sell a SPAD would be no more than $350. And no manufacturer can recover the cost of $3 or $4 million to get it through the FDA, to get it as a product. Consequently, it's not being produced.
So it sounds like you're saying that it's not just the profitability of the device, but it's the FDA requirements that...
There's the FDA requirements that prevents the companies from going into it. Plus the incredible risk they take if anything with any piece of equipment goes wrong. And unless we change the legal system and have an ironclad agreement signed by any patient that must be adhered to by the lawyers, which at this time it is not. The cost of medicine in the United States will continue to increase until we all go broke.
Interesting. Interesting. Just a couple of last things, Dr. Kolff. I'm wondering if you could comment at all on the role of, say, the International Society of Nephrology and some of the professional organizations that grew up during this time in the 1960s or so. Perhaps their impact on the field, organizing impact?
I was invited to give a talk for the International Society of Nephrology. I knew nothing about it. And the man who asked me was an extremely nice man. He said they would give me honorarium, pay first-class traveling expenses. And he told me they had 60,000 members. Maybe there's These numbers are wrong. Let's say there were 12,000 members. Okay, let's say 12,000 members. Sounds to be. Who said, well, I have practically no. I have very little grants, and whatever money I have for research, I have to scratch together. I said, well, if you have 12,000 members, you can charge every member $1 to pay for my research. And I will come if you pay me $12,000 for research. Well, something like that he couldn't do legally, or it was never done before. I said, well, you know what I said. Well, he's a very nice man, as I said before. So in the first place, they gave me a honorarium of 10,000, which was nice. And then they induced the various companies that make artificial kidneys to contribute $5,000 each, so I got $15,000 for research. So I gave him the talk, and that was it. Paul speaking. Yes? Just wait a minute. Stop music. Rotating drum, artificial kidneys. So as I said, one went to Mount Sinai, one went to Montreal. I forgot this one.
Paris? Did one go to Paris?
Maybe it did go there. And one went to Poland, behind the Iron Curtain.
That disappeared.
But I had not realized at the time that when industry was changing from wartime industry to peacetime industry, no industry had the time to fool around with something like an artificial kidney. Because I didn't know that beforehand. But as so often, it worked out very, very well. I made a few more that were sent to other places. But these were hidden during the war in various places in the city of Kampen, so that if bombs would fall on Kampen, they would not all be destroyed. As it happened, no bombs fell on any, very few fell on Kampen, and no fell on the artificial kidney. So I had all these kidneys to give away. Also, to make these artificial kidneys during the war, when officially nothing could be made except for the German Wehrmacht, was a wonderful experience. Everybody falsified papers. Yeah.
Just one or two questions. Just one or two questions, if I may. Do you have any comments about, perhaps the role of the NIH in the development of the dialysis machine in the 1960s and 70s, and maybe the contract program?
The NIH held back. It was the Hartford Foundation that promoted dialysis in the United States. They had a wonderful manager who was one of the managers of one of the Hartford stores. And he was a wonderful man. Got his name now. He dealt with the board of directors of the Hartford Foundation. One of them was a very strong anti-vivisectionist, a particular anti-vivisectionist, and particularly opposed to the use of dogs. So to deal with them, he had a photo album that he showed all his wonderful, and the old says, and the old, while he was turning the pages, the old lady said, "Is that a dog?" I said, "No, that's a man." And he was a wonderful man, and he did much more for the promotion of dialysis than the NIH ever did. Then Benjamin Burton was very good at it, but he was being frustrated. There has been no connection whatsoever between the amount of money spent by the Public Health Service to the treatment of end-stage renal disease, which isn't it between $2 and $3 billion per year?
Oh, at least.
And the amount of money that is spent by the NIH to build better dialyzing machines, which, if they did, would result in much less expensive dialysis. And I've told you earlier that industry is not particularly interested. Just like the automobile industry, they're not interested in building small, inexpensive automobiles. They want to sell you large Lincolns or Cadillacs. So industry is basically opposed to building less expensive machines unless they could beat the rest of industry. But that's not so easy.
Interesting. Just in conclusion, Dr. Kolff, would you care to comment a little bit on your work today with the artificial heart and some of the projects you have going on there?
Well, the future for the artificial kidney, if you look at it that way, is not very great. Because we all have, most of us have 2 kidneys, we can give 1 away. The results of kidney transplantation improve all the time. So you can assume that the artificial kidney will be reserved for patients that are either very old or that have rejected transplant so often that they are no longer candidates, or have some other reasons why they are not. Okay.
So you don't foresee an implantable
I don't
kidney?
see, I foresee that the number of artificial kidneys will stay about the same, will probably decrease a little bit in time, but then there are whole areas of the world where they're just beginning. China has come up very strongly. Japan already dialyzes more people than we do. Countries in the Pacific Rim, such as Indonesia and India, are coming up. So, and you probably also know that the results of dialysis in Japan are much better than they are in the United States. Now, for the artificial heart, the situation is quite different. We have only 1 heart, and we cannot usually give it away. I've had a request from a man from Bangladesh who said that my only source, the only way I can take care of my family is if I sell my heart to you, and then my family can live. I have refused that offer. I've also had a prison doctor here who had a whole list of prisoners convicted to death who wanted to donate their kidneys, and I haven't wanted to do anything with that either. He never understood that, but I refused it. There is some talk about genetically changing pigs so that they become even more like humans than they already are. And if you do that, you can probably transplant a pig kidney in a person. Do you know how long the life is of a pig before he meets the butcher? Well, 5 months is the bacon that you had this morning. And a 3-year-old pig is a very damn old pig. So if you transplant the pig kidney, unless they also change the aging process of the pig, which is not so simple, you can probably expect that a pig modified transplant kidney will work for 3 or 4 years and then be very old. And nobody talks about that.
I haven't heard that actually.
Well, yeah, because they're not farmers. And I had enough to do with pigs in my life, so I know it. I've also had a lot to do with human pigs, but that's another question. The future then for the artificial hearts is excellent. Even if you succeed in delaying death by coronary artery surgery and by creating new pathways by little laser beams in the heart, that's all. There's a French expression that says reculer pour mieux sauter. go a few steps back to jump better. Death will come to these patients. And the number of deaths that will occur for patients with heart disease is not going to decrease. It may come later, but that number is large. There are no more than 2,000 donors in the United States. And there will not become any more. Because the longer we keep an accident victim alive, the greater the chance is that he will get infection and other problems, and his organs are no longer acceptable. So you're limited to those few brain death patients who have been shot. If you had a very active police, we could shoot them, but that's not what we do. The number of donors is not going to increase. The future for the artificial heart then is enormous. But in the United States, it will be very slow, because the FDA wants security in an unsecure world. The FDA is also used for political purposes. Compare it with the French pill, which they've been holding up for 4 or 5 years. I mean the abortion pill. The FDA is used for the unbelievable, the head of the academy, no, the head of the Utah State Medical Association, to which I belong, called the FDA and said, don't give permission for the artificial heart because we cannot afford it. The FDA was not established to be an expense control organization, but they are used for it, willingly or unwillingly. Also, the artificial ear developed here in Salt Lake City, which is great, has had no complications, no death, has been held up for more than 9 years after they had an IDE. And the company, a year ago the company said we can no longer make them for an IDE, that's the investigation and device exemption. We need approval. Didn't get it. So it took 22 months to get approval for implantation of the first Utah type artificial heart in Dr. Barney Clark. You can easily calculate that during those 22 months, 60,000 people died in the United States from heart failure. Yet, the FDA will not give it free. So the only way to get progress with the artificial heart is to go to other countries. And that is what we'll have to do.
Is that happening?
Very sad.
Is that happening now, or are you working with other countries in terms of the artificial?
I'm getting some funding from other countries.
But not from the U.S., not from...
What?
Not here in the U.S., though. Funding in the...
Not in the U.S.
Not in the U.S. Interesting. Very good. Okay, well that...
If you want
Please.
one final statement.
Yes, please.
I said earlier that I have only one philosophy, which has always been very simple. If you can improve the quality of life, and you can return a patient to happiness, if there is a reasonable expectation is that you can do, you can apply an artificial organ or whatever else you want to do. If that is not the case, you should not apply it. Now you can make a mistake in your evaluation, but that's the things that you should try to do. Now, there are a few exceptions. For example, General Franco was kept alive with the artificial kidney.
Oh, really?
Had several dialysis by one of my pupils until they sorted themselves out, and there has been a good transition of the government thanks to that. The guy who followed Antropov, not such a nice guy, who was the head of the KGB, in Russia. His life was prolonged for, I believe, 9 months with dialysis. And during those time, there was an orderly transition of the government. The first Gorbachev was the result. Very worthwhile. Then there was a really good guy, was Kreisky. Kreisky was a chancellor in Austria. And when he came up for re-election, nobody in the campaign ever mentioned that he was on dialysis. There's one other guy, he's a bad guy, I forgot who he was. But there are a few exceptions to the rule. So occasionally you may want to keep a patient alive until his family comes to say goodbye. But as a rule, you must restore happiness.
Okay. Well, that concludes this interview with Dr. Kolff on November the 27th, 1995 in Salt Lake City. And it was very interesting. I'd like to thank Dr. Kolff for his time. And again, my name is David Ahlstrom, New York University. Thank you.